Hello, everybody. It's Maurice Button here, the CEO of City Financial Global. Welcome to the latest in our series of speaker interviews. I have the pleasure of having with us today Tajinder Singh, who's a Deputy Secretary General of IOSCO. Tajinder is going to be speaking at the third annual Sustainability Reporting Summit being held here in London on the 31st of January. Tajinder, welcome.
Thank you.
Very, very good to have you with us. Let's turn to our first question. What is IOSCO's role in sustainability-related corporate reporting?
So I think it's a good question, which is why, as the global standard-setting body of more than 130 regulators that together regulate more than 95% of the world's capital markets, why did IOSCO choose to get involved? The answer is we got involved because of the role of capital markets in this area and because of the strong interest of investors in sustainability. So take the example of climate change, for instance. Now, it's clear that capital markets are core to funding the transition, with estimates of capital allocation needed globally being upwards of around $4 trillion per year up to 2030. So if capital markets have to play a role in this context, then for them to work efficiently, they need trust, because investors need decision useful information that is consistent and globally comparable and that they can trust. So in short, all three of IOSCO's objectives get engaged in this process, which is about investor protection, market integrity, and financial stability. So we'd started discussions on this topic more than 5 years ago. We established the Sustainable Finance Task Force in 2020 and used the pandemic to move fast with discussions with the voluntary standard setting bodies, with the IFRS Foundation to publish, I would say, quite a landmark report in July 2021 that first set out our key expectations on sustainability disclosure by corporates. So that's the reason why we got involved, because of investors, because of the role of capital markets, but also in addition to investors' expectations, the G20, the G7, the Financial Stability Board, and indeed all stakeholders have been asking IOSCO to play a key role in this regard, something that became very clear to me at the last COP28 in Dubai.
Yes, indeed, indeed. And obviously at COP28, there was this discussion around the ISSB, Sustainability Reporting Standards, which IOSCO has endorsed. How significant do you think your endorsement of these standards will be for the world's capital markets? Do you see it as a catalyst for them to move forward with them?
Indeed, I do see that as a catalyst. And clearly, again, the rationale is that the markets are global, they are cross-border, there is therefore a need for global comparability and consistency for investors. So just to step back a bit, this felt need of the investors had resulted already in a number of voluntary standard setters taking some initiatives for coming up with their standards, also for them to try to work together, which we really appreciated. But then to address what was then being called the soup of voluntary standards, we then, in our report that I was mentioning of July 2021, we called for the setting up of the ISSB under the IFRS Foundation. And the reason for that was because of our similar role in the context of meeting investors' needs for accounting standards. So then you fast forward to the announcement of the ISSB setting up in December 2021 in Glasgow, our close engagement with them, the publication of their draft S1 and S2 standards in the summer of 2022, their finalization in 2023, and then the endorsement that you alluded to by IOSCO within a couple of months in July 2023. Now, we pulled together resources for the immense technical and strategic efforts that went into the assessment and ultimate endorsement of the ISSB standards. Now, this, as you rightly say, this is an historic milestone for IOSCO because this decision, firstly, it was unanimous, and then it gave comfort to our regulators, but also to the global capital markets, that we saw these standards as fit for purpose. And we are hopeful that, similar to the role that we've played in the endorsement of the accounting standards, that has resulted in these standards becoming the de facto a global language for financial reporting in more than 160 jurisdictions globally. we are hopeful that the ISSB standards are going to become the global language on sustainability to talk to global capital markets. So we are hopeful that the endorsement will encourage jurisdictions to adopt these standards, to apply these standards, or to be otherwise informed by these standards so that investors across the world have access to complete, consistent, and comparability and comparable sustainability related information so that they can make
Mm,
investment decisions. The important part that I do also want to mention here is that apart from engaging with the substance of these standards, we were also engaged in looking at the process and the governance around standard setting through a key role that IOSCO played and continues to play in the monitoring board. And now
mm.
2024, we are looking for this to be a big year for us in the progressing of the implementation of the standards and building capacity in regulators so that members can learn from one another as they seek to implement the standards.
Absolutely. You talk about the super disclosure, various sort of voluntary disclosure standards which have preceded the focus around the ISSB standards. So are we now harmonizing, do you think, generally around three largely overlapping sets of standards: the ISSB standards, the European Sustainability Reporting Standard, and GRI, which serves a slightly different purpose? And if we are, what's going to happen with the US? How is their progress going to fit within with the planned SEC ESG disclosure rules? How is that going to sit with the other standards? Is this the last stage of consolidation, do you think?
Yeah, indeed. As you mentioned, we've been seeing a lot of global movement at unprecedented speed around these corporate disclosure on sustainability. Now, we've seen quite a strong engagement between the bodies you mentioned, between the ISSB, the GRI, and with the jurisdictional approaches such as the EU. Indeed, you would recall that the European Commission announcement about the ESRSs just 5 days after IOSCO's endorsement of the ISSB standards in July last year, they
Mm,
explicitly mentioned integrating ISSB standards into the ESRSs. And
mm,
that we thought further strengthened the use of the ISSB as a global framework. So we continue to look at the ISSB as a global framework. Indeed,
mm,
our endorsement decision, you would have seen, was a nuanced one because it was sensitive to the context of our different members. So our members could look for a number of ways, to take forward the global framework. It could be a full implementation of the ISSB standards. It could be voluntary adoption or any other way. We've also explicitly welcomed further jurisdictional adoption guidance from the
mm,
ISSB on the pathways to implementation in the different contexts that I was mentioning in a way that fosters interoperability. So,
mm,
where jurisdictions are developing their own set of standards, in our view, they should seek to achieve interoperability with the ISSB as the
yeah.
global framework to ensure that comparability remains. Because, as I mentioned earlier, let's look at this ISSB standards as a common language to
Mm,
talk to global markets about sustainability. There may be, in this common language, there may be individual accents. Different people might
mm,
speak this language a bit differently, but the language, that's the framework, needs to be common. And I think I am cautiously optimistic that we are getting there, that we should be having this global framework that is underpinning what is
mm.
happening in different jurisdictions. And therefore, I remain positive that in one way or the other, we will and we must move towards implementation around this global framework.
Indeed, indeed. And I suppose as this work draws towards a close, when you look at the discussions at COP28, that there's a renewed emphasis on nature and biodiversity loss. And I suppose the next phase in this work is going to be looking at this new frontier. How do you see that evolving and being incorporated into this standardization around the ISB standards?
Indeed, I think you're right about those topics. I would still step back a bit and mention that point about why we are interested, what the objective is. And the
Yeah.
objective for us is that there is sufficient trust and integrity in these markets so that investors can make informed decisions about their capital allocation without being subjected to greenwashing or other
Mm.
fraudulent activities. So that's really the core point. Now, these
Yeah.
topics are important, but it is towards ensuring that there is trust and integrity, and indeed nature, biodiversity, human capital, and many other aspects, they should be taken into account if they are material to investor decisions in these markets. And it is important also to remember, again, stepping back a bit, that the first standard that IOSCO endorsed, which is the IFRS S1, is
Mm.
about general requirements for disclosure of sustainability related financial information. And that requires companies to disclose material information on all sustainability risks and opportunities that could
Yes.
reasonably be expected to affect their prospects. So, in a sense,
Mm.
yes, these topics are important, but let's remember the foundation. That's
Yeah.
about the general requirements. That's about trust and integrity in these markets, and therefore we know that the ISSB is assessing its future priorities
Mm.
after public consultation. That includes questions about whether to prioritize a project on biodiversity, ecosystems, and ecosystem services. And this agenda setting process is an
Mm.
important one. And that's
Yeah.
why I alluded to governance earlier. And the governance of the standard setting process includes the agenda setting process as well. And it's important, therefore, that the agendas, that the topics are picked in a manner that follows due process and that is material to investors and to these markets. And we strongly encourage that in this exciting journey, I think, towards also the next topics. We look forward to our continued engagement and are, again, continue to be optimistic about the prospects in this regard.
Very good. So interesting to talk to you, Tajinder. For our viewers, if you want to hear more on these topics and related ones, please do attend the third annual Sustainability Reporting Summit in London on the 31st of January. And Tajinder, thank you so much for sharing those insights with us today.
Thank you very much.